I'm Barry Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College. Welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues affecting our communal well-being through a nonprofit lens. We're a proud partner of ACC TV. My guest today is Cookie Ruiz, Executive Director of Ballet Austin for the past 24 years. She's known throughout Austin and beyond as a top-notch nonprofit professional leader. Overall, Cookie has more than 32 years of experience in the areas of strategic planning, organizational development, and nonprofit fundraising and management. Among her many achievements and recognitions, Cookie is a 2016 Austin Arts Hall of Fame inductee and has been highlighted in the Austin Business Journal's Profiles of Power. She is a certified fundraising executive whose commitment and passion for the arts drives her to be one of the active leaders in our cities, our states, and our national arts organizations. She is president of the board of Texans for the Arts and on the board of Dance USA, among her other volunteer and professional commitments. I know Cookie is a much appreciated and admired colleague. Her full-day session on creating an organizational culture that supports fundraising is the highlight for many participants in our Certificate in Effective Fundraising. Cookie's leadership of Ballet Austin has brought it to national prominence. Quoting its mission, Ballet Austin involves and strengthens the community through the creation and experience of dance and the encouragement of health and well-being. Cookie, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here today.
It's great to have you here. So, how do you carry out that rather lofty mission? Well, what do you actually do?
First, if you allow me, thank you for the kind words. So I thank you for that.
My pleasure. Well deserved.
Our mission has actually just been revised, and it started through a process that started with the artists and members of our team, and then kind of rose all the way up through the organization.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we know about Ballet Austin, people often talk about an elevator speech, and we say what we do at Ballet Austin isn't an elevator speech unless it's a very tall building, because there's a lot of things that we're doing in the community of which people probably are not aware. Right. I think we're very often associated, and we are proud to be stewards of the Nutcracker, so I think we're very often associated. We have the oldest Nutcracker in the state of Texas. We have been doing that work for 57 years consecutively. Oh. It allows us to reach about almost 30,000 people a year that come through our doors within 3 weeks.
Just for the Nutcracker? Just
for the Nutcracker.
Wow.
13,000 school children. So it allows us to reach out in such a powerful way, and we are so proud to be stewards of that. In many cases, holiday tradition for families, as families have emerged being all kinds of ways that people come together and define family. But we are also an organization, as per the mission, that has now realized we have a pretty significant role that we can play in this idea of creation of new work. We have in 2003 become part of what we do and think is as a civil rights organization and as a human rights organization. So we've been involved in social justice work since that time. Right. We tour internationally with our social justice work as well as other. We are deeply involved in schools for the last, we've had programs in Title I schools for 30 years now. We are deeply interested in finding talent wherever it lies. We're interested in addressing barriers to provide access for all people to art, because we believe all people should have art in their lives and want to, if barriers can be addressed. We are passionate about our role and the small role we can play, but large in the people's lives that come to us around a lifelong health and well-being. We're working with the aging population with fully underwritten programs that are obviously free of charge to seniors that are working on balance and core strength.
I may come by.
I'm telling you, these are really good. We start losing balance in our 20s, sadly. So, and we have been working with breast cancer survivors in a program at no charge to the survivor for nearly 10 years. Sadly, there's about 200 women in the program. We hope one day there will be none, but there are, and so we're there. We work with families with young children. We work with women as they're going through pregnancy. We're working, I think our oldest patron in our Pilates program, I believe, is 94. So we think of ourselves as, we are a public charity. And so it's our job to figure out how do we draw lines of relevance within the community? It's not the community's job to figure out what's the ballet company doing. So
That's an interesting perspective.
well, and I think as Austin kind of goes a bit rogue, we certainly do. We're not terribly interested in what anyone in our field is doing. And so I don't think we look at things that ballet companies do these things. We think, what do we as an aggregate group of human beings, what do we have to share with our community? Where's there a need in our community where we might address that in some small way? But collectively we as community come together and hopefully have a better Austin. So
That's fantastic. I just learned a great deal.
tall building.
Very tall building. I mean, Frost Tower size.
There you go. Yeah, even taller. So maybe Estonian and BF.
How do you get that word out to people?
I struggle with that because a number of people learn about or come to our programs that are specifically around barriers and say, you should be doing articles on this and you should be doing interviews on this. And that it at one level, no, that's not why we're doing it. So ultimately, I think, and there would be those that disagree with me, for sure. But I think in a perfect world, we're known through our good work. And if we have good work, then we're known by the people who receive that from us. And then they tell others, perhaps more so than, I'm not a big fan of spending a lot of time using either my right or left arm, reaching around to pat myself or our organization on the back. So that said, tremendously proud of what we do.
Right.
And we have an extraordinary board and a very large board and a large base of people with us. So I would say it's kind of up to them, maybe. and we have a phenomenal marketing team. Don't misunderstand me.
No, I
we do let people know, but we're the programs where we're really working in terms of access or lifelong health and well-being. They're rather quiet. They're effective, but yeah.
So I was going to ask you, how do you make ballet relevant? And I think you just gave me a.
Well, I can riff off that a little bit if I could.
Please.
I think relevance and art. I mean, any conference you go to, how does art remain relevant in the 21st century is sort of like a through line. You can count on that. And there's been so much time spent on this idea of relevance, and having had a lot of conference travel and a lot of opportunity to think about it, I'm pretty convinced personally that relevance at some level within an arts organization, I'll use art and I'll use ballet, what could be what could be perceived as maybe an elite art form,
right,
or not welcoming to others. So years ago, probably 20 years ago, I was talking about barriers, and a colleague whom I respect said, okay, you're going to move into an area where you have more access and you're going to be on a bus line. Great. That's great. Those are great barriers. How far will you go? And I pondered that for a minute because I thought, wow. And I realized I'd never really thought about that. How far will we go in addressing barriers that might be preventing people that wanted to participate from that participation? And the answer has to be as far as is needed, right? As far as the community needs. And what's happened is our community's changing, and those needs are changing. And so what we addressed years ago isn't enough. So I think relevance has everything to do with addressing barriers, because when we address the barriers to trial, people come. So our audience, we've done a lot of work with the Wallace Foundation. We've been very fortunate to be part of a 4-year study with 25 pretty significant arts organizations across the country, operas and symphonies and theaters, and only 3 dance companies out of the 25. Uh-huh. And in that, there was a lot of qualitative and quantitative research. And ultimately, we, having amassed so much information, it is really very surprising to find out that when we started this process with the Wallace Foundation 4 years ago, Ballet Austin had one of the youngest, if not the youngest, of the 25. So one of the youngest audiences in America. And at that time, the average age of our audience member was 51 years old. Today, it's like 40.
And that was the youngest, huh?
That was the, but people think the average age of a ballet audience is 75, or a symphony is 75 years old. You hear about the graying of the fine arts audiences, and you hear that there are no millennials there, and that when they all die, the whole thing dies. And right now, the average age of our audience member is under 46 years old.
Wow.
So, so that to me is a little bit about relevance, is if we're addressing the barriers and we are making the invitation and people come, then, and if our audience does look reflective of our community, and surprisingly, you would be surprised. You can come all dressed up, and you can come in jeans and flip-flops or whatever you want to do, and everything in between, and we see all of it. Then I think that maybe that's relevance.
I know from my own knowledge and involvement that you've reached out to the African American community, you've reached out to the Jewish community, the Hispanic community in terms of some of the art that you guys are performing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, it's interesting. I came to Ballet Austin in 1996, and the first thing I did at that time, because of my background, my own personal background, and I've had the opportunity to live all over the country and all over the world. So as a result, growing up the way I did, the one thing I never lived in a community of one kind of people, ever. And probably Austin's been the closest to being a little bit more, not little, lot more geographically disparate than any community in which I lived. And I was surprised by that. And so as a result of that, the very first thing I started doing was working within communities.
Right.
And so, and I failed, by the way. This was a great idea that was actually a terrible idea.
Fayer's a great teacher.
Indeed, but I spent years developing communities within communities, and inadvertently, I ended up with, in my audience, with visual segregation. There were these people, and there were those people, and there were the other people. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was to welcome people inside of our organization as a community and have them populate that community. So it didn't work. It worked, and then it didn't work. Some would say financially it worked. We sold lots of tickets, but that wasn't really the goal. So I didn't just disband, well, sort of, but began to work in different ways and think about it in different ways. Today, Ballet Austin is one of 20, well, among the, I think we're the 12th largest ballet company in the United States, but the 20 largest ballet companies in the United States are involved in something called the Equity Project. And there has been a historic underrepresentation of the African American and Black community on stage in ballet. Mm-hmm. And so we are 3 years into that project. It's sponsored by the International Association of Blacks in Dance and Dance Theater of Harlem and the Mellon Foundation out of New York. And so we're looking at what does it take, because this art form is difficult. These artists train a lifetime for about a 8 to 18 year career, maybe 20. So it's not a matter of plucking somebody out and putting them on a stage. If you mean this, you've got to start at the very beginning.
Yes.
And that means, and it's not always scholarship. Everybody immediately goes to money. It's not always scholarship that's needed, but there's support that's needed to raise that artist up and to give them that opportunity. So we are very interested. We have a board that is phenomenally committed to ensuring that the board, our staff, our artists, our audience, our community. Otherwise, there is no relevance, right? Then why bother? If it's a small group of people that are off in a corner doing something, why do it? Why do it as a public charity? That would be a for-profit venture that has its specific part of the market. We're not. We are a public charity, so it changes it for us.
How do you see this? You said you just changed your mission.
We evolved the mission.
You evolved it. What's the future for the Ballet Austin?
I think that's actually what we're working on right now.
So you're not going to give us any proprietary secret information?
No, I am in a certain way. And I'm going to say that about 2 years ago, we realized We came to Ballet Austin and we were all by ourselves when we brought our building, and we decided after 50 years we were going to try to get a little closer to downtown. So we were sort of 4 or 5 blocks west of anything cool, all by ourselves in what used to be the warehouse district.
I remember well.
And so we were finally able to get property and hang on to it and try to raise the money for that and develop that project. So ultimately, there we were over there by ourselves, and today across the alley is the Google building. At the end of my building is a Facebook building, and
We're pathfinders.
well, occasionally even a nonprofit, I suppose, gets lucky. But in that, our world has changed, and where we live changed, and who we're serving has evolved, and being downtown has given us a sense and a place at the table as our city changes and develops. So our board, about 2 years ago, we began a planning process that's different. Everyone's planning strategically since about 2000, right? There was such significant change between 1995 and 2000 that people by 2000, and I love planning, so this has been something I've enjoyed my entire adult life, kind of left long-range planning, and everybody went to these strategic bursts of 3 to 5 years. Right. We're actually doing the opposite. We will always do 3 to 5 year bursts, but what we're finding is that 3 to 5 year bursts were just rather kind of locked in with one another, but no real clear thought about North Star. So we are in a process called Envision 2040. We're about 2 years in, and somewhere in year 1, one of my amazing board members said, well, stop. If we're thinking about a time 20 years from now, and we're trying to put a flag out there so that our strategic efforts lead in that direction, then what does Austin think Austin will be in the year 2040? So that is an amazing question. So we spent last year focused on the answer to that question, and we went to people like Ryan Robinson, the city's demographer, brought the board together and said, okay, let's look at our city in 1990. Let's look at it in 2000. Let's look at it in 2010. And when one takes time to do that, looking at even just heat maps of distribution of population, it's stunning what we're seeing. And so now, I'm a little bit of a demographic and data nerd, so I can hardly wait for the 2010 census to come out. But what we are learning and what we're seeing, we also work with Institute for the Future, IFTF, which is really interesting. Futurists it's dark. It's really dark. It's not Jetson backpack and we all fly around in our backpacks. It's our jetpacks. But we did really deep study and said, okay, so if this is where Austin's going, we stand an opportunity. We've got a lot of wealth coming our way, but we have real growing poverty. We have a missing middle. Mm-hmm. We have young families in some ways being gentrified outside of our tax base. We have a school district that's closing 10 schools. We stand a chance of being a city that maybe goes from being majority minority back to majority white, which is nothing that I think is good or healthy for a city. And so we looked at all of those things. We laid them all out and said, okay, if this is where our city's headed, then what will be our plan for that? So that's what we're working on.
Interesting.
And it's really very interesting work because we are in service to community.
Let me shift, because that's
Sure.
fascinating. But let's talk about Cookie.
Oh, dear. Okay. If we must.
So in the time we have remaining, okay? So you've traveled an interesting road. What would you be doing if you weren't the director of the
Ballet Austin?
Ballet Austin?
I was probably much better suited and much better trained to remain as part of the American Red Cross Natural Disaster Response Team. So I was working on disaster relief. So I'm trained to open up feeding shelters for the masses. I'm trained to go in and do disaster welfare inquiry research once a tornado has wiped a city clean and you can't figure out where you are. And I've done blood service, no longer part of American Red Cross. I was a military child, raised on military installations all over. Military wife, Air Force child. And as my family, my father was a pilot, And so I was born, people ask, where's your hometown? I say, I don't have one. They say, everyone has a hometown. I'm like, well, I was born in Shreveport. They say, well, you don't have much of an accent. I said, well, I was there for 10 days, so I didn't pick up much of the local culture. But my father...
You weren't a child genius?
I guess I wasn't. I wasn't that. But my father was a Lockheed pilot, and so we were transitioning from aircraft to aircraft to aircraft, so that was months or weeks at a time. So as a result, my family's culture was, when we land somewhere, we must start to serve, because otherwise all we do is take. So my father's was always hunger. He was born to abject poverty. My mother's was always literacy. And then for me, I don't know, I just started at a really tiny age. I guess if the American Red Cross would let me as a child hand out napkins or something.
It's part of your family culture.
So it became my personal culture, yeah. So, yeah.
So if you were to step back, or step forward as the case may be, and talk to the younger Cookie, okay, what would you tell her about what to expect in your life? And
yeah. I think one has to get to a certain age to start doing that, but I'm there.
I'm not suggesting you're at the age where you only look back.
I
mean,
celebrate.
You've got a great future too.
I celebrate age because of the alternative, but no, I celebrate age. I think for me, I would tell myself to chill out. I am a planner. I am someone that has a plan A and a plan B and a plan C, and I'm probably suspenders and belt. I've got to do a talk tonight where I'm going to have 3 forms of redundancy. And that's how my mind works. But almost every great thing that happened in my father's life, which is he had an extraordinary life, and he'll turn 100 August 5th. He lives in Austin, and he's in very good health.
Wow.
Just got off the phone with him. So I could be here a while, given my family's history. But he has forever reminded me that most of the fantastic things in his life that happened, he didn't plan. Somebody else got knocked out of it, or he was standing there as number 2 or number 3, or whatever happened. When the moment came, he was the right guy. But a lot of it wasn't of his plan. And so where I spent a lot of time planning, I have to accept the fact that most of the great things that had happened in my life were maybe serendipity, but were absolutely not in my plan. I didn't plan to go to Ballet Austin.
So
It's on me.
So you have to plan to be spontaneous.
Well, you have to.
Or be ready for spontaneity.
You have to open yourself up. That maybe I don't have the best plan.
How would you describe your leadership style at Ballet Austin?
It's an interesting question because I think I am a student of leadership and have been my entire life. And I hope I'm someone that leads by example. I give great value to servant leadership. That is a culture from my family. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I hope that I exemplify. I don't think any of us can probably comment very accurately on our own leadership, but I can tell you that the leadership I most admire, whether I exemplify it or not, it's not the person that grabs the baton and says, follow me. And that's a kind of leader, and I think the business community actually, and maybe politics and society actually celebrate often that kind of leader. Yep. The leader that I'm most interested in is a leader that's in the middle of the pack and the group pushes that person forward. I'm fascinated by those, and I know there's some extraordinary leaders of that type in Austin, and I'm a fan of that kind of leadership.
Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Not the answer I expected, but very interesting. So what would you tell a person entering the nonprofit arena? Because your expertise and your knowledge goes way beyond Ballet Austin, obviously. I mean, you're known for the qualities you just talked about in terms of being a planner, being thoughtful, and so forth, and being a professional. So what would you tell a young person entering the arena?
First of all, thank you. I have the great joy of working with a lot of young women have found their way to me. And so when you ask that question, I think oftentimes I'm asked for, what piece of advice would you give me? And I think it's very true of nonprofit, but I would say it's true of professional, regardless of the path someone takes, but very important in nonprofit work. And that is that I want young professionals to figure out from their own value system, who are they and who do they want to be, and then intentionally be that. It's like a brand. It's like your reputation is your personal brand. If you're going to be the person that's always early, do whatever you have to do to set that up and be that. If you're the person that's the most effective communicator, spend time on your communication. But the single greatest skill, because I'm not going to make a gender assumption and say all women are taught to be pleasers, but there's been much written about the gender bias in that area. And I think one of the things that I really encourage young women to figure out how to do this automatically, and that is this idea of under-promising and over-delivering. And the opportunity that there's a tendency to so badly want to please that there is that over-promising, and then learn to figure out immediately when someone says, "What's your deadline? When can you get that to me?" To immediately know when you could logically do it at a day, and then get it 2 days early. That one thing sets up trust in the leaders around you,
Right.
and it sets up that you're serious, you mean what you say, you're a person of your word. And in nonprofit work, that's one of the most important things, is that our team members have to be people we trust.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to close our show. Trust.
Trust.
Because I think people trust your judgment, they trust what you're doing, and I think ballet's doing a phenomenal job, and
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you being here with me.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Civil Society, and thank you to ACC TV for producing this show. You can read more about Cookie Ruiz, Ballet Austin, and the issues we've discussed, and view previous episodes at nonprofitaustin.org/civil society. Thank you for watching.